Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Romana Zahn and this is our first AMH, Association of Master Herbalists online seminar. And shortly I'm going to introduce you to Murad, and I'd like to first tell you about what we're going to do. For the next 40 minutes we'll be going through the talk, and then at the end we'll be doing some Q&A. And if you have any questions, can I ask you just to click on the chat button and type them in there. So I'll address them at the end of our chat. You'll find the icon at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. If you're on your phone, I really don't know, you'll have to search for it, but I'm sure it'll be easy to find. So you're here at the seminar that's about psilocybin. We've got growing concerns about mental health and treatments for mental health, because 1 in 6 people have a mental health condition and 1 in 100 have severe mental health illnesses. So people that have mental health problems, they die younger than those with poor physical health. And that actually says that people that have very profound, serious mental health illnesses, such as psychosis or bipolar, die an average to 10 to 17 years earlier than the general population. So today I've got Dr. Wahab here, and he's a psychiatrist with a long-held interest in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And throughout his career, Murad has the opportunity to work with specialized services, including ones that manage substance use disorder and treatment-resistant mood disorders. Alongside his work in forensic services, he is currently the study clinician for the psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression trial running here in Newcastle. So welcome, Murad.
Thank you, Romana. It's good to be on the first webinar. Huh?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's good to have you here. So it's quite interesting because psilocybin found in mushrooms has been used by indigenous populations for millennia to have these kind of spiritual experiences. Why has it suddenly become an interest in the NHS as a treatment for mental health illness?
I suppose it's not so much that it's a sudden interest. I mean, this interest was around back in the 50s and the 60s with the kind of the rise of LSD and similar substances, and psilocybin was one that was investigated, albeit not as much as LSD at the time. And then research died for quite some time after the Controlled Substance Act came into place, because there was a strong counterculture that was growing with the psychedelic, kind of in the psychedelic world. So it came out of the laboratories, it went into the streets, and people were using it quite extensively. And so the war on drugs was started, and I suppose the baby was kind of thrown out with the bathwater. So right after the Controlled Substance Act, we see a huge drop in research. But a few people, I think, who've continued to see the potential benefit in these substances have continued to try and get it back into the mainstream, or get it back into research. And they've been trying to do so for the past maybe 20, 30 years. And their efforts are almost kind of surfacing now, but this is not so much a something that just came out of the blue. This is something that has been slowly being pushed for the past 30 years or so, because of the potential that these substances have. It's currently more, perhaps there's more space for it to be heard now, I think, because we are kind of reaching a bit of we kind of, the drugs that we have now to manage the mental health problems that are so prevalent do not work for everyone. They leave a significant portion of people still needing more help that they sometimes struggle to find. And also because of these little studies that have been done over the past few years, slowly proving that these substances can have long-lasting effects and are not as harmful as other people have thought them to be, and they are not as they're not as dangerous. They're not as we don't have to be as avoidant of them as we thought we should. And I think this,
even though it's a scheduled herb, it still shows that there's less toxicity than something like nicotine or alcohol or even caffeine.
the psilocybin is a really physically safe drug. I think it definitely is much safer than alcohol physically. And the scheduling of it, I think it's something that might be revisited once we have a little bit more research, because the consensus, or at least the published consensus amongst drug experts in the UK and others around Europe, is that psilocybin is actually one of the safest substances out of all the recreational substances, and this is what the substance use experts see. So yeah, despite it being Schedule 1 substance, I think there's substances at the moment that are on different schedules, are much more available, but can be much more harmful to the person and to society. But of course, it's not to say that it's without its risks, and I suppose we're going to talk about the risks a bit later on, but certainly I think there's room for maneuver there.
So research like this will really help towards, trying to shift it out of the schedule to use as a treatment.
We would hope so. I mean, studying a Schedule 1 drug is not an easy thing to do, because you need special licenses, you need special places for it to be kept, you need people who it can only be prescribed by certain people. Their names need to be on the Home Office license. And it's also quite it's more expensive to study because of all these regulations. So I think if it continues to prove that it is safe and efficacious, and it is something that can be potentially used as a treatment, rescheduling would really, it would help rescheduling, and then rescheduling would really help further research. So it would be kind of a nice cycle to get into.
So I'm really pleased that this is being trialed, and particularly here in Newcastle, because it's a big deal. Because if we start getting these results, things that have been used by shamans and indigenous populations for years, it is coming to the forefront, because they really believe that this had these kind of spiritual aspects of these plants had a big benefit to human nature and how we exist and how we manage our lives. So how in the mental health process is this treatment taking place, and what are you kind of seeing in the results in the trials?
So yeah, I think process is really key here. So kind of our relationship with fungi is really old. We have a long relationship with fungi. We've used them to, we eat fungi. We eat mushrooms. They're very nutritious. We've got penicillin, kind of was a product of fungus. And some chemotherapeutic agents that help us fight cancers are from fungi. So it's not new, really, that we kind of find something of such substantial interest in the fungal world. And as you say, it's been used for a long time indigenously, and the context in which it is used seems to make a really big difference in how a person benefits from the experience. And I think this is also something that makes it very unique. So the process in clinical practice is no different, really. It's, of course, it's perhaps not in a natural environment as it is used indigenously at times. It is more of a bit more clinical, but even within this clinical environment, there is a designed room that is fit especially for this purpose, where it is made not to look as clinical, to look a bit more aesthetically pleasing, a little bit more colorful, a few maybe paintings on the wall, some little ornaments to be put in around. Preparation and integration are really an integral part of the process. So I think as if going on any trip, really. I mean, if you're going to the Lake District, for example, and you don't know that it's going to rain, and you don't have raining gear or things to or a tent or something to help you manage what you're going to find there, I think you are not really going to get much from the trip. You're going to suffer unnecessarily for just a long period of time.
Creating a safe environment for the person. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, creating a safe environment and preparing them for what comes, so that they know that they might feel very happy and then very sad and then probably maybe anxious, maybe angry. They can get an influx of emotions, to know that they might see things or visions perhaps from their past, from their childhood, to know that they may see things that frighten them very much. So just and giving them tools to go through it, to be able to endure the be with whatever process is unfolding until it rises and it passes. And this is really the crux of it, to be with any process as it comes up and then comes back down and passes, rather than try and get out of it when it's uncomfortable.
So this is really an individualized treatment then, because everybody will experience something different, whatever's going on in their being, and you don't know where that kind of effect might take them in their psyche.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's very much us facilitating the person's own journey. So the journey that happens, or the process that unfolds, is very much person specific. We are there to help them go through it, but the work happens internally. And integration, of course, is useful, so that we see them the next day and we talk them through the experience, what they saw, what they found useful, and what they can take from it. And then we talk about how this can be integrated into daily life, because again, I think it's really good to compare it to a trip, because it's something that a person endeavors upon and then comes back. And if they for changes to be long lasting, there needs to be some sort of change in daily behaviors, or little things that help sustain a change. Otherwise, the brain can easily go back to its previous patterns. So if whatever insights have been had, whatever change in perception has been had, this tends to it can shift back, but it can be more sustained with daily practice of little things.
So the difference here is that partly the substance, the psilocybin, what I understand about it activates neurogenesis, so it creates new neurons to form, so that it allows that kind of new neurological pathways to occur in the brain. So you respond differently to any situations that you've had that have been challenging to live through, or if you've had fear, or if you've had PTSD. Is that what you're finding in the research that's happening?
I think in a way, so there's not been many studies on psilocybin itself and neuroplasticity, as far as I'm aware, but there have been similar substances like dimethyltryptamine or DMT, which is quite close to psilocybin, and on LSD, where it does seem to stimulate cell growth, but this has been done kind of outside, not within people. So these are nerve cells that have been separated and have been tested individually, but they've seen that they do grow. But yes, the thought is that there might be a window where the brain is more plastic, and where it can make changes a little bit easier. But also an important part of the actual treatment process is that people tend to report becoming unstuck. And I think that's really key. So people who are depressed tend to be really stuck in patterns of thought. They can be So like everybody, so we all have filters, we all have templates with which we see the world. I think that's just part of being human, a part of our consciousness, and the job that our brain does is to give us sort of a summarized version of reality. We cannot see everything that exists in reality. We need to see what is important to us for our survival. And in this process, the brain is selective in the information that it digests and that it presents to the person that inhabits it, basically. So as that happens, and as we get older, sometimes these filters get more and more opaque, and our view of the world it takes on a certain direction, and I suppose we can become less open. For people who have depression, this perception can be negatively skewed. So the perception of the world, what the information that is selected versus that is what is ignored, can veer towards a negative side. So for example, if a person is socially anxious and they enter a room full of maybe 20 people, and if we say 18 people are smiling and 2 people are frowning, perhaps the attention will be directed more towards the 2 people that are frowning, rather than looking at the whole picture. What psilocybin seems to do is that it acutely, in the short term, it provides some respite from this state of being. So Aldous Huxley called it a reducing valve, called this mechanism a reducing valve, as in it constrains cognition, constrains reality. What psychedelics, psilocybin and other psychedelics can do is that they can provide a period of unconstrained cognition. So these templates sort of dissolve for a short period of time. And this is what allows new insights to be had or to be seen, because we can step outside of our own narrative, of our daily narrative, of our daily filter. So this in itself can be quite useful to break this cycle. And also, it seems to open some pathways or create an avenue for subconscious processes to present themselves to consciousness. So people might get memories that they've long forgotten, or it's like almost like an induced dream, where you can get symbolic representations of different thoughts and ideas and things that perhaps might be hindering somebody from moving. So this mix of stepping outside of the narrative, having access to some subconscious materials, and this window, this potential window, because we really don't know yet, of neuroplasticity afterwards, might be why people can step outside of the narrowness of depression and begin to see the world in a different light, and keep seeing the world in a different light for a while. But this is still all quite early. So this is just based on the research we have now, which is still limited. I think we're going to find out more as we go, but this is how it is, as I understand it, at least.
So there's quite a complex number of things going on in the session. It's not just like that it's taking away your fear, because as you've described it so well, that it actually changes your model, your templates of reality, so that you do have different perspective on that kind of situation or scenario you go into in your mind, which is quite fascinating, because drugs don't do that, do they?
It really is fascinating. They're really, I mean, they're fascinating substances, to be honest. And I think that's why there is this resurgence in the interest, because neuroscientists like them, because they tell them about consciousness and the brain and the seat of the self and the ego, things like that. So we as psychiatrists are starting to have interest again, because they can help us with depression. They may be able to help us with depression, may be able to help us with people with end-of-life anxiety, perhaps addictions. It has and some people are looking at it for anorexia. So there's really a wide variety because of this mechanism, which really kind of gives space for these templates to change. Then it can be a transdiagnostic tool, so it can work on more than one diagnosis. And it's really fascinating, because it's not just one thing or another, so it doesn't really diminish the fear response. People can have really significant fearful experiences, but it's but when they go through the fearful experiences and they come out the other side, it's they can see it differently. They can interact with this fear differently because they've experienced it and they've allowed themselves to experience it, and they've been able to accept it and know that it passes. So if somebody, for example, is afraid of heights and they spend their whole life avoiding balconies, they will continue always to be afraid of heights because they will never have an experience that tells them, I was at a height and nothing happened to me. What stays in the brain is avoid, 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 avoid. So avoidance tends to reinforce anxiety. So being with an emotion as it comes up and it comes down can be quite helpful. And this is what came up in the qualitative analysis when they asked people what they found helpful in their sessions. They the second most common thing is accepting of difficult emotions. The first was connection. They felt connected to themselves, to the world, to their families, their relationships. And the second thing was accepting these difficult emotions. So it's really quite something.
Yes, it is. And I think when you're in a controlled environment going through that again, what you want more than anything is to feel safe and connected. And often when you're going through it, you want to disconnect from it as quickly as possible. And having to relive that, nobody really wants to go back there. And the difference, I think, with current drug models is that they kind of dampen that. Those sensations of feeling those emotions, whereas what you're describing here is going through and actually feeling those emotions and feeling and the scenarios that may have created that kind of trauma in the first place.
That's right. There's certainly a difference in how the drug works. I think it's there is a tendency to I suppose think about conventional antidepressants as something that just takes emotions away and dampens emotions. I think which can be the case for a lot of people, but I think for some people as well, it just it can have an effect on also on this bias, on this negative bias that people see of the world. So for some people, it doesn't blunt them. It gives them space to be able to do things that can get them better in the long term, and then they can come off of it. So they're far from perfect, but I suppose the reason I'm making this point is I think there's usually a bit of a narrative of we have to throw everything in the toolbox that we have away and kind of embrace these new medicines, which may be the case in the future. But I think at this stage, I think it's a bit early to say that we will get rid of something completely and completely pay attention to something else. There's currently room for both. Some people this works for, some people the psychedelics will work for, but there is certainly they don't all work the same way. let's say that. So they do work quite differently. People don't need to take them every day. Its effect long outlasts. It's how long it stays in the body. And it can help people that haven't been helped by these conventional drugs. So there's certainly something to be said for that. Yeah.
So does the treatment actually hold for some people? You know, is it one dose and they have a life-changing effect with it, or do they need several sessions of it before they actually start seeing transformation?
What we're seeing now is that most people tend to the studies on depression are not very many. There's really only one on treatment-resistant depression. The ones that they did for cancer, end-of-life anxiety, that one dose seems to have had an effect for really quite some time. And I think they recently did a 4.5-year follow-up, and they found that some of the participants still had an effect, and they still see it as really quite a significant experience in their lives. But with depression, I think a lot of people did relapse. I think it's hard to expect that something that has been going on for 17, 18 years changes in such a short period of time. But it's equally remarkable that people can stay well for a year without antidepressants after being ill for 17, 18 years. So about 30% of people in the treatment-resistant depression trial in London, the one that happened in 2006. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was 16 or perhaps 17, but anyways, the one on which this research is based, about 30% of people didn't need medication for about a year afterwards.
Right.
Granted, there 30% of people would be like 3-4 people. It's not a lot, but it's still 3-4 people that were helped for a long period of time after things not working for 18 years, which is a lot.
Yes. So are these people that are getting psilocybin that have to come off the drugs, or are they on the drugs and you give them the psilocybin?
No, they would need to come off their antidepressants. They would need to come off because what we see is that because antidepressants seem to have an effect on serotonin receptors, which is where the psilocybin has its effect, then the psilocybin is attenuated. The effect is attenuated if people are on SSRIs, and so we need to take them off their antidepressants for a while.
I see. Okay. And in the research, do you, because there'll be lots of herbalists here as well listening, are you using the active ingredient, or do you use the whole plant? How is what the research is being done on?
The current research is using psilocybin, so the actual the substance. Mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, have a wide variety of different substances in them. So it's not just psilocybin. There's psilocybin, there's the breakdown of it, and there's a couple of other ones as well. What we use is synthetic psilocybin that was made in a laboratory, which is, I think it's the way the European Medicines Agency wanted it, and because the drugs need to be synthesized to a certain standard, and the company that's sponsoring this trial manufactured it to these standards, and so this is the psilocybin we're using.
So there's a project there to happen, isn't there? To somebody to do the comparative study with the whole plant and see what happens.
That would certainly be an interesting one to have. I mean, I suppose once we have more data and we can study psilocybin and the other substances in the mushrooms as well, because there might be an entourage effect where it might not just be the psilocybin. The psilocybin is the main one, but you've got all these. They recently even discovered some enzyme inhibitors within the mushrooms as well. And there's different species of mushrooms. So there's several that contain them. There may be a difference between different species of the mushrooms and what kind of effects that they can have on people. But I think because of all of these variables, the idea was to pin it down to the substance that we think is the most important and has the most is most responsible for the psychedelic effects, and work with that so that we can measure it, how much we need, where we can get it from, without having these variables to say, oh, was it this or was it that?
I see. Okay. Yeah. So you talked about consciousness and the effects that it has. So you can go into euphoric state, and is there some cautions with it as well? Can you come out of, a session like that feeling worse than you went in?
You can, yes. It's, I think in a lot of different therapeutic processes, people can get worse in the short term, and this is something that's known, for example, of something like psychodynamic psychotherapy. When some material is coming out in the therapy, people do tend to be a bit more unstable in the middle. And for psilocybin, it's no different, really. It's sometimes it hasn't happened. I think it's happened once in London, where one of the participants did come out feeling worse because he had an experience which he couldn't make sense of. He and this is published. So I can speak about it because this is out there. Where he had a vision of himself being smothered basically by his father, and this didn't go with what he remembered of his father at all. Let's say he always remembered he had a good relationship with his father. There was no problems there, but he had this vision. It was very disturbing for him, and he did get worse for a short period of time afterwards. But what happened with him is, through integration and through helping work through this memory that arose. So basically they tried to understand what was the significance behind it. Why was it so disturbing for him to have it? Besides the obvious, of course, of it being somebody being smothered by their father, but because it did not go with the narrative of his life that he was used to. It was confusing. Perhaps he was thinking that, was he living a lie throughout his life? Is there something that he didn't know? So this was really disruptive. In the end, after a few sessions, this seemed to resolve once he started to understand that perhaps he had come to the conclusion in the end that if this had happened, then he would have known about it. Basically, this, without going into too many details, and I think to take a bit of time, but basically there were problems with his mother as well at the time, and his mother was giving him a lot of information about what his father had done when he was young and things like that. And it helped him understand the context, and that this potentially didn't happen because he would have known about it. And after that resolved, which is my point really, after resolution, after coming to an understanding about what it is that happened, and being able to accept the experience as it is, and being able to recognize or remember the blissful parts of the experience as well, that this wasn't just what the experience was about, this was just a little part of it, and that it came back to it because they watched their videos together, and they watched, they asked him to watch the video of himself in the journey. He was able to go through that. So perhaps something's resurfacing.
Yeah, interesting. I'm just wondering whether he went into a dream state, and in dreams where you're getting images and visions rather than the actual reality of it happening. But I guess when you're in that state, it can be difficult to decipher whether you're in a dream state or whether it was some reality that happened.
Exactly, and it's hard to know.
Yeah, they're very fine divides in our mind, aren't they?
Yeah. Definitely, and these can be really vivid. These can be really vivid. So the visual cortex tends to light up under psychedelics, and memories can be seen much more vividly. And this can, it's hard sometimes to know which one of them happened, which one of them didn't. That's why it's important to look at them symbolically and what they represent, and what people take away from them. But which is why integration is important, and preparation also, because I can't imagine something like this happening at a festival at night when somebody doesn't have anybody around. Granted, there might not be the circumstances for these kind of things to unfold, but if not in the correct environment, these experiences can be really quite traumatizing without the appropriate support, which is why it's so important.
Yes, controlled environment. Yeah, absolutely.
Controlled environment support, and for people to know what it is that they're going into. They need to understand that they're going into an experience that would leave them in a vulnerable place potentially, and they need to be somewhere where they can be vulnerable and safe. So for example, if somebody needs to drive a car a few hours after they go into the experience, something like that, just these precautions, because you were asking about cautions, and I think set and setting are of utmost importance, and dosage, of course. So setting and dosage are really, really important.
So these are treatments done on a one-to-one. Do you foresee there being sort of one-to-many in order to get more people through? Because certainly I've seen abroad in Europe that there's these centres that are being set up where you can go for a group psychedelic experience. Is that going to happen on the NHS, or?
It's hard to know. I think this is something that is definitely on investigators' minds, and it's something that people would like to do. There's really something to be said for the power of a group in itself, and the power of the group process, especially when going through something that can be as deep as that for a lot of people. And as you say, anecdotally and traditionally, it's always consumed in groups, or most consumed in groups. So I think there's definitely room for that, but when it will come about or how is still to be seen. But if for nothing else, it's because it's such a long process, I imagine cost effectiveness would be an issue, because you need therapists to be there for all day. So perhaps if this was not for one person, but for a few people, then this would be a more practical, besides, of course, the importance of the psychological aspect of it and the group processes we were saying, also practically it would make sense. So there may be room for that. It would be, I would certainly be interested in that. I think that would be really...
Do you think that would happen in the trials that are happening at the moment, that you'd go into a group session, or would it just be on the one-to-ones?
The trials that are going on that I know of are one-to-ones. There may be ones that were of more than one person coming up soon, but as far as I know, they're one-to-one so far.
Okay. So I'm aware of the time, and time's pushing on, and I really want to ask you a few more questions. So when do you think this when do you think this treatment will be available for people? Can they access it, and for which conditions?
Oh, that's a hard question. That's I really need to be a bit of a psychic to be able to look that far into the future. But I hope it's not going to be too far. I think so they're putting a time for maybe MDMA assisted therapy for into 2021. So psilocybin is a bit behind that so far. So perhaps maybe a couple of years after. But then again, we when we look at the United States, for example, and we see that psilocybin has been granted breakthrough therapy status, which basically means if it shows efficacy, the approval process will be expedited, so it will be quicker. And it's been granted this status for depression and treatment-resistant depression. And also, it's really quite striking how quickly the research is going now. So it's almost like all of the efforts that have been happening over the past 20, 30 years is all coming to a peak now. So this is, and we're seeing a lot of different studies, not just with the Compass trial, which I'm part of at the moment. There's different companies that are coming on the market. There's different companies that are like, there's the Asuna Institute, for example. They're coming on the market as well, looking at depression in the United States. There's Imperial College. They have a study going on down there as well, comparing it to escitalopram. So it's moving quicker than I think people anticipated. So it might surprise us, and it might come about earlier, perhaps. But I would say in the next few years, maybe 3 to 5 years. But it's really anyone's guess, to be honest. It's it can
go through government policy as well.
Yeah.
As well. What about the other conditions? You haven't mentioned whether it would work on other conditions like schizophrenia, for instance, or psychosis. Or general anxiety even, but you're looking at very drug-resistant treatment of depression only, is that right? Or
we are looking at depression only, but this is by no means the end of it. So around the world, it's being studied for addictions, it's being studied for OCD, it's being studied for anorexia. There's one that's just started in Johns Hopkins. There is, we talked about addictions, tobacco and alcohol addiction. There's studies going on right now.
PTSD?
PTSD, not so much. It's more, the PTSD is more in the MDMA world. So it's more using MDMA for it, but that's a bit of a different story, but it's equally interesting. It's things where perhaps there's an overstabilization of a certain state. So when there's a stuckness of a certain state, like anorexia, like addictions, like depression, like OCD, when there needs to be some sort of destabilization or acute destabilization so that there can be some change. For things like mania or bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis, this is something that's really not being ventured into at the moment at all, because it's part of the concern that this might precipitate latent psychosis. So people with a propensity for it, or have had history of it, or have a close family history of it, this might be precipitated by psychedelics. And because it's so delicate at the moment, and it's so new, and it's important that we kind of to be basically as safe as we can to when using it, as with any drug. So I'm not saying that it's in no way going to happen, but I think it's very unlikely in the near future, at least, that it's going to go in that direction of psychosis or schizophrenia or anything like that. It's a different sort of mechanism, it seems.
Okay. I'll open up for questions if that's all right.
Have we got 40 minutes already?
Wow. It's flown by.
Yes, it really has.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got 10 minutes for questions. If anybody wants to ask anything, please just click on that chat icon at the bottom of your screen and just type in your question. But I can't see any questions at the moment, so I'm going to ask one while people are thinking, is that can they get onto a trial? If somebody's suffering right now, can they get onto the trial?
Yes, absolutely. So so we have, I think it may be good to share our website. The website has information on how to get involved. We basically, it's this is a referral only study, so we would need a referral from a GP or a psychiatrist. But our team are really quite happy to receive emails from anybody, and we direct them to the appropriate places. And everything else is there online, really. It's run via the Northern Center for Mood Disorders. So this is one project among many with mood disorders, and the principal investigator of the study has extensive experience with a lot of different treatment modalities. So it's they would be in good hands, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And I can share the link to the website.
That would be great. And that's not just the Newcastle area, is it? It's also in London, you mentioned as well. Anywhere else?
So it's going ahead in London, and Newcastle, Bristol, Manchester, and in Ireland as well, and Dublin. And we also, so we are not restricted to only the Newcastle area. So we would be able, if County Durham or in Scotland, so we have some space to take in people from a bit from a bit further away. Sorry, I got a bit distracted there because the question popped up. But yeah, so we have scope to. So basically, don't let geography stop you. There's ways around it.
Okay. Well, maybe you can type in your web address in the chat so people can grab that and put it in and use it. The question I've got, what response have you seen in high functioning depression versus low functioning depression states?
So I'm not sure I understand 100%, but what I'm understanding of the question is, do we see a difference between people who are depressed but going about their daily lives and going to work and kind of having a lower level sort of not incapacitating depression versus people having incapacitating depression? Would you think that would be an accurate?
Is that what you were asking? I think it's Gillian. Is that what you're asking, Gillian? By all means, unmute yourself if you're okay to speak and tell us directly, or just yes. That's she's typed in yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that was my question.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Gillian.
I think it's there's not been anything looking specifically into this. What we have looked at is perhaps whether there was a change in quality of life after this, but it's there's not been anything to look specifically into that. It's still very early days, I think. And also, is there something specific? So I'm interested by the question itself as well, though. So was there something specific on your mind when you were asking that? What was it that you were thinking about?
I'm just curious about the range of depressive states that this could be utilized for, and what sort of responses you may have already seen already in your work.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So the range, the people who were in the London trial were really quite treatment resistant and really quite severely depressed. I can't really go much into our own trial because it's still in progress. But I think it will be able to be used across different severities, because even if we think it's getting breakthrough status for major depressive disorder, which is not treatment resistant, plus treatment resistant depression, I think that in itself implies that there may be a use for both of it, both as perhaps a first line treatment or as a treatment to be used when things haven't worked, which puts us at different parts of the severity spectrum. Yeah.
I suppose it would have to be taken on a case-by-case basis, since everyone responds differently to any kind of substance, whether it's a very simple herb or something like psilocybin.
So, sorry, I couldn't hear you very well, Gillian. Apologies. Can you repeat
Sorry,
that?
the connection's really bad. I'm very sorry about that. I'm guessing it would have to be taken on a case-by-case basis, because everyone responds differently to different substances based on personal chemistry.
Yeah, well, yes. What the treatment itself would be on a case-by-case basis, you mean? Yeah, definitely. So it would be very much on a case when it is in clinical practice. It would be very much on a case-by-case basis, whether the person themselves are interested in having it, what they've had before, where we see them in their kind of depression journey. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. This might not be the answer you're looking for, but it's because I don't think I got the question very well as well.
Is that okay, Gillian? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm satisfied. Thank you very much. Because my connection's not been great, are we able to get a recording of this?
I'll address that. Yes, definitely. If you're an AMH member, you'll get the link sent through to you. If you're a non-AMH member, then you'll need to write in and request for it.
Okay, well, thankfully I'm a member, so yay.
Great. Okay, wonderful, Gillian. Okay, we have another question, Murad, from Tristan. Are there any physical side effects to the synthetic psilocybin, like stomach aches? People who take natural psilocybin often get stomach aches, I think.
Yes, we've seen, so nausea is one of the, nausea and stomach pain, but mainly nausea are one of the side effects that we can expect sometimes, yes. Yeah.
How do you handle the side effects? Because there's quite a few, isn't it? The side effects would be nausea and what's the other one? I can't remember. There's mostly nausea, I think, and sickness. Yeah. Yeah. We really encourage. So it's not as bad as it would be with natural mushrooms, and but we do encourage people to sort of sit through it, and it does tend to pass. We haven't really seen, and if a person needs to be sick, then they can be sick, but we've not really seen it cause much of an issue at all. It's not been something that we've had to it usually is transient nausea that passes. And the side effects, I mean, a lot of the side effects I think we would just call effects, so because it's kind of just what the psilocybin does. And so far they've been just in all the previous studies, they've been well tolerated, and there's been no serious adverse events in that respect, so it's been okay. You can even come out euphoric from what I've read.
Afterwards?
Yeah. There's a kind of a psychedelic afterglow that people talk about, where people can come out feeling, oh, okay, that's like they see things in a different way, or they feel like the world is a bit more bright, things are a bit more vibrant. And that stays for a bit, but then that passes, and what stays for longer is the work that people put in. So. And also, you talked about the different states, these different sort of states that you go into. You can get these states naturally as well. You know, it's been studied that meditation or breath work or yoga and fasting weeks, you know, afterwards you can get into these states of euphoria or get in touch with these visions and have these experiences. So it's not just taking psilocybin, but of course this psilocybin gets you there very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the means to an end. The thing about psilocybin is that it's a very quick and relatively sure means to that end, um, if in the right dose, in the right circumstance. And other methods take a lot of work and a lot of practice to be able to reach it, that people might not have the motivation to do. But ideally, it would be whatever state was presented, or whatever windows were open with the psilocybin, people can know that they are there, so that they can work towards getting there without anything. And that would really be the ideal. Some people might be able to, some people might not, of course. Not everybody is the same, but you find people after, and this is anecdotal, but from my understanding, from conversations and conferences, and with people who themselves have had these experiences, they come back and they start meditating, or they take up yoga, or they tend to look for practices that help them connect with themselves in a different way. Some of it because of what the states that they've been exposed to. So yeah, it's definitely not the only way, and it's just a way available for the people who might need it.
Okay. Another question: do you know the dose equivalent of the synthetic version you use in actual psilocybin mushrooms? For example, 1 dose of synthetic equals to how many real mushrooms?
So it really depends on the mushroom. So you have for example, psilocybin cubensis, for example, that has maybe, from what I remember, maybe 0.6% of psilocybin and maybe 0.4% of psilocin, which is not very high, to other mushrooms which would have much higher. It really depends, but yeah, no, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say. But if we say if it's 1%, then maybe it's about 2.5 grams for the higher doses. So about, yes, being in nature is indeed incredibly healing. Yes, of course. Yeah, no, we're part of it in the end. So yes, it is very healing. And sorry, just back to the dosing question. Yeah, it's about that. It's about, maybe if we talk about 1% concentration, maybe about 2 to 2.5 grams.
You don't know how much that equates to the number of mushrooms.
It's really variable, because the size of mushrooms differs as well. So you can get some where you have little tiny separate ones. You can get bigger ones, and
yeah, it depends on the species. Yeah,
and this is really partly why we use psilocybin in milligrams rather than grams of mushrooms, because we wouldn't really know what we're getting.
Yeah. Another question: are the trials conducted in a clinical setting? It might be preferable to work out in nature to help people develop a much stronger connection to nature. As a race, we are so disconnected from nature.
Yeah, I mean, of course, ideally, a retreat somewhere, an NHS-funded retreat in somewhere in the Northumberland would be lovely. But we have to work within what we have, and I think the space we have here is really a beautiful space, and it's made for people to feel contained and to feel comfortable. And there's nature around us, for sure. There's nature around the hospital there, so I guess it's next best thing. But yeah, I can't argue with being in nature being better, really. But it's not a clinical setting. It's in a hospital, but the setting is made to be a lot more aesthetic. So it's a very pleasant room with lovely lighting and nice music. It's a nice place to be.
Quite homely.
Very much so. Yeah. A nice comfortable bed and a weighted blanket. So it's made for comfort.
Wow, that's a gentle way to go in. Yeah. Okay, we've reached our time, and I'd like to thank Murad Wafa, and that's it from us today. it's a goodbye from myself and Murad. And this was an online event brought to you by the Association of Master Herbalists, and we hope to see you again. So keep a lookout for the next seminar. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Murad. Thanks very much.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Got
Bye-bye.
Thank yous for the seminar. So
Yes,
thanks everybody for joining. Thank you all for being here. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye, Murad.